The exploration ship Starbound drifted through the quiet darkness of space like a metal island in an endless ocean. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the stars through the main window, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The ship was on a routine survey mission near the edge of human space, mapping new worlds for the colonial expansion program. It was supposed to be safe work, boring even, which was why they allowed families on board. Lisa Carter sat in the engineering section, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she checked the ship's power systems. Her daughter Amy sat nearby at a small desk, working on her homework with a dedication only an 8-year-old could show. The girl's blonde hair fell across her face as she concentrated on her math problems, occasionally asking her mother for help with the harder questions. "Mom, what's 7 times 8? Amy asked, chewing on the end of her stylus. "What do you think it is?" Lisa replied without looking up from her work. She had learned that making Amy figure things out herself helped her learn better. The girl counted on her fingers, moving her lips silently. 56. "That's right, sweetheart." Lisa smiled and reached over to ruffle her daughter's hair. These quiet moments were precious to her. Life on a survey ship could be lonely, but having Amy with her made everything better. Dr. Peter Kane walked into the engineering section carrying a datapad filled with readings from their latest planetary scan. He was the ship's xenobiologist, a thin man with kind eyes who had become like an uncle to Amy during their long journey. "Any interesting readings from the last system?" Lisa asked. "Nothing that hasn't been catalogued before," Peter replied, settling into a chair near Amy's desk. "Just some basic mineral deposits and atmospheric readings." "How are you doing with your studies, young lady?" Amy looked up with bright eyes. "I'm learning about multiplication tables." "Did you know that anything times 0 always equals 0? A type did know that." Peter chuckled. "Math is very important for space exploration. Engineers like your mother use it every day to keep us safe." The comfortable routine was shattered when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors as Captain Morrison's voice echoed from the communication system. "All crew to emergency stations. Unknown vessels approaching." "This is not a drill." Lisa's training kicked in immediately. She had served in the military before becoming a civilian contractor, and emergency protocols were burned into her memory. She quickly secured her workstation and turned to Amy, who looked scared but was trying to be brave. "Stay close to me, baby," Lisa said, taking Amy's hand. "We're going to go to the safe room until this is over." They made their way through the corridors as other crew members rushed to their posts. Through the ship's windows, Lisa could see massive shapes moving against the stars. The vessels were unlike anything in human records, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The safe room was located in the center of the ship, surrounded by the thickest armor plating. Lisa, Amy, and Peter joined the other non-essential personnel there, waiting for word from the bridge. The ship shuddered as something locked onto their hull with tremendous force. "What's happening?" whispered Amy, pressing close to her mother's side. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll be okay," Lisa said, though her own heart was racing. She had faced dangerous situations before, but never with her daughter beside her. The lights flickered and went out for several seconds, before emergency power restored dim illumination. When the main lights came back on, they revealed figures standing in the safe room that definitely were not human. The beings were 7 feet tall with gray chitinous skin that looked like natural armor. They had 4 arms ending in clawed hands, and their faces were angular with large dark eyes that seemed to look right through everything they saw. The creatures moved with predatory grace, and Lisa could feel the menace radiating from them like heat from a fire. These were not peaceful explorers or curious scientists. These were hunters, and humans had just become their prey. One of the beings, wearing what appeared to be a commander's insignia, stepped forward and spoke in perfect English. "I am Commander Vexstar of the Zephyrian Dominion. Your species is now under our authority. You will comply with all instructions or face consequences." Captain Morrison was brought into the room, his hands secured behind his back by some kind of energy restraint. His face was bruised, but his eyes still burned with defiance. "These are civilian families," he said to the alien commander. "They're not soldiers. They pose no threat to you." Vexter tilted his head, studying the humans. "Like specimens in a laboratory, threat is irrelevant. You are property now. You will be separated for processing and transport to our research facilities." The word separated sent ice through Lisa's veins. She pulled Amy closer, feeling her daughter's small body trembling against her side. Around the room, other families were doing the same thing, parents instinctively protecting their children. "We have valuable information about human space," Captain Morrison said, trying to negotiate. "Trade routes, colony locations, defense capabilities. Surely that's worth keeping us together." The alien commander's laugh was a harsh, chittering, "Sound information can be extracted. Cooperation is unnecessary." He gestured to his soldiers, who began moving toward the families. Began separation protocols. Adults to holding bay 7, juveniles to research vessel 2. That was when Lisa Carter felt something change inside her, something that had been sleeping since Amy was born. As alien hands reached for her daughter, she realized that these creatures had made a terrible mistake. They thought humans were weak because they showed love for their families. They were about to learn that love could be the most dangerous force in the universe. The alien soldier's clawed hand reached for Amy's arm with casual indifference, as if she were nothing more than cargo to be moved from one container to another. Lisa stepped between them without thinking, her body moving on pure instinct. "Don't touch her," she said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her heart. The Zephyrian looked down at her with what might have been amusement. Without warning, his other hand swept across her face in a backhand blow that sent her sprawling across the metal floor. Pain exploded through her skull as she hit the ground hard, tasting blood in her mouth. "Mum!" Amy screamed, trying to run to her mother's side. But another alien soldier caught her easily in its forearms. Lisa pushed herself up from the floor, spitting blood onto the metal plating. The physical pain was nothing compared to the sound of her daughter's terrified cries. She looked up to see Amy being carried toward the door, reaching desperately back toward her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Please," Lisa said, climbing to her feet despite the dizziness that threatened to topple her again. "She's just a child. She needs her mother." Commander Vexter watched the scene with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab animals. "Emotional attachment is a weakness we have observed in many species. Separation eliminates this weakness and makes subjects more manageable." Other families around the room were being torn apart in the same way. Children cried for their parents, while adults begged and pleaded with their captors. The aliens showed no emotion at all, treating the human anguish as if it were background noise. Dr. Peter Kane was pushed against the wall next to Captain Morrison. Both men powerless to help as the families were destroyed before their eyes. Peter had studied predator behavior on dozens of worlds, and he recognized something in the aliens' movements that chilled him. These beings weren't just taking prisoners. They were breaking spirits with surgical precision. But as he watched Lisa Carter slowly rise from the floor, Peter noticed something the aliens had missed entirely. The blow that was supposed to cow her into submission had instead triggered something else. Her breathing had changed, becoming slower and more controlled. Her posture shifted from defensive to something else entirely. Lisa's mind, trained by years of military service and sharpened by the responsibilities of motherhood, began working with crystal clarity despite the chaos around her. She noted the positioning of the guards, the layout of the room, the types of weapons they carried. Her engineering background automatically catalogued the alien technology she could see, looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Amy's cries grew more distant as she was carried away, but each sound cut through Lisa like a blade. The part of her that had been a loving mother and devoted engineer was being burned away, leaving something harder and more dangerous in its place. The aliens finished their separation procedure and began herding the adults toward another section of the ship. Lisa moved with the group, but her eyes never stopped recording details. Emergency panels, ventilation grates, power conduits. Everything became a potential tool and a plan that was already forming in the back of her mind. They were pushed into a holding area that was clearly designed for prisoners. The walls were smooth metal with no handholds or hiding places, and a single door provided the only entrance or exit. Automated systems scanned them constantly, monitoring their vital signs and movements. Captain Morrison sat heavily on one of the simple benches, his face grim. "I'm sorry," he said to the other prisoners. "I should have been able to protect you." "This isn't your fault, Jake," said Helen Price, one of the ship's navigation officers whose 10-year-old son had been taken away. "How could we have known something like this would happen?" Lisa found a spot near the back wall and sat down, but her mind never stopped working. The holding cell was obviously designed to contain beings much larger and stronger than humans. The aliens had built it for their own species, which meant it might have blind spots. When it came to human capabilities, she closed her eyes and tried to recall everything she had learned about alien technology during her years in military engineering. The power systems seemed based on crystalline matrices, similar to some experimental human designs, but far more advanced. The scanning systems were clearly biological in nature, probably keyed to Zephyrian physiology. "Lisa," Dr. Kane said quietly, settling down beside her. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, and Peter felt a chill run down his spine. The woman looking back at him was not the same person who had been helping her daughter with homework just hours before. There was something predatory in her gaze, something that reminded him of the apex hunters he had studied on distant worlds. "They made a mistake," Lisa said in a voice so quiet that only Peter could hear her. "What kind of mistake?" "They think taking Amy away from me makes me weaker." Lisa's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "They don't understand that they've just made me more dangerous than any weapon they've ever faced." Peter studied her face, seeing the transformation that was taking place. He had read about human parental bonds in his xenobiology studies, but this was the first time he had witnessed the phenomenon in person. The protective instincts that drove human parents to extraordinary lengths were not just psychological, were triggering actual physical and mental changes. "What are you planning?" he asked. Lisa's smile was cold and sharp. "I'm going to get my daughter back, and I'm going to make sure these creatures never threaten another human family again." The hours passed slowly in the holding cell, but Lisa used every minute to study their prison. She observed the guard rotation schedules, noting that the aliens seemed to follow very rigid patterns. She listened to the sounds of the ship around them, identifying the rhythm of the engines and the flow of air through the ventilation systems. When the lights dimmed for what the aliens apparently considered night cycle, Lisa made her move. The scanning systems were designed to detect large movements and biological signatures, but they were not calibrated for a human woman who had learned to move like a shadow during her military training. She slipped to the ventilation grate near the floor, using her engineering knowledge to identify the locking mechanism. It was sophisticated by human standards, but it was designed to keep large, powerful aliens from breaking through. A small human with the right knowledge could bypass it entirely. As she worked on the locking mechanism, Lisa felt Amy's presence, like a compass needle pointing north. Somewhere in this ship her daughter was scared and alone, probably crying for her mother. That thought fueled her determination and sharpened her focus until nothing else in the universe mattered except reaching her child. The lock clicked open with barely a whisper of sound. Lisa looked back at the other prisoners, all of them sleeping fitfully on the hard benches. They would be safer if she worked alone, at least until she could assess the full situation. She squeezed through the ventilation opening and into the ship's maintenance areas, beginning her hunt for the most dangerous prey she had ever stalked. The aliens had wanted to separate her from Amy to make her manageable, but they had instead created something they had never encountered before: human mother with nothing left to lose. The maintenance tunnels of the alien ship were like a maze of metal and crystal, but Lisa moved through them with growing confidence. Her engineering background helped her understand the basic layout, even though the technology was far more advanced than anything humans had developed. Power conduits ran alongside data cables, and she could feel the vibration of massive engines somewhere, deep in the ship's core. She had been crawling through the tunnels for almost an hour when she made her first important discovery. The aliens' internal sensors were calibrated for their own species, which meant they had trouble detecting human heat signatures and electromagnetic patterns to their scanning systems. She was almost invisible as long as she stayed in the maintenance areas. Lisa paused at an intersection of tunnels, listening to the sounds of the ship around her. Footsteps echoed from the corridor below the heavy, measured pace of alien guards on patrol. She counted the rhythm and timing, building a mental map of their movement patterns. From somewhere far away, she heard the faint sound of a child crying. Her heart clenched as she recognized Amy's voice, and she had to force herself to remain calm and think tactically. Rushing toward the sound would only get her captured, and that would help no one. Instead, she began her campaign with psychological warfare, using the aliens' own ship against them. Her first target was the lighting system. She found the control junction for an entire section of corridors and carefully introduced a feedback loop that would cause the lights to flicker randomly. The effect was almost immediate. She heard confused chittering from the guards below as their perfectly ordered environment began to malfunction in ways that made no sense. The flickering lights created shadows that seemed to move independently, turning familiar corridors into uncertain territory. Her next target was the ship's environmental systems. She accessed the atmospheric controls and introduced subtle changes to air pressure and temperature in different sections. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make the aliens uncomfortable and on edge. The ship that had been their perfect hunting ground was beginning to feel hostile and unpredictable. Lisa's military training had taught her that fear was often more effective than direct confrontation. An enemy who was constantly looking over his shoulder was an enemy who made mistakes. She intended to give the aliens plenty of reasons to look over their shoulders. She spent the next several hours moving through the ship like a ghost, always staying one step ahead of the search parties that were beginning to look for the source of the malfunctions. The aliens were methodical in their approach, but they were also predictable. They searched according to logical patterns, never expecting their quarry to double back and strike again in areas they had already cleared. Her first direct encounter with one of the aliens came when she was accessing a data terminal to learn more about the ship's layout. The guard appeared around a corner just as she was finishing her work, and for a moment they stared at each other in mutual surprise. The alien was larger than her by far, with natural armor plating and claws that could tear through metal, carried an energy weapon that could probably vaporize her in a single shot. By every logical measure, she was hopelessly outmatched. But logic had nothing to do with what happened next. Lisa moved with a speed and fury that caught the alien completely off guard. She wasn't fighting like a soldier following rules of engagement or a civilian trying to defend herself. She was fighting like a mother defending her young, and that made her something the alien had never encountered before. The creature tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Lisa was already inside his reach, using her smaller size to her advantage. She went for vulnerable joints in his natural armor, nerve clusters she had identified from studying their anatomy during her hours of observation. The fight was brutal and brief. When it was over, the alien lay unconscious on the floor, his weapon scattered pieces of metal and crystal. Lisa stood over him, breathing hard but unhurt, and realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She had always thought of herself as a peaceful person, someone who solved problems with engineering and logic rather than violence. But somewhere in the depths of her being, evolution had left her with tools she had never known she possessed, tools designed specifically for protecting her offspring from threats. The alien's distress signal had already been sent automatically when he fell, so Lisa had only minutes before reinforcements arrived. She quickly searched his equipment, taking anything that might be useful, and then disappeared back into the maintenance tunnels. When the other guards found their fallen comrade, they discovered something that sent shockwaves through their ranks. The unconscious alien was babbling about the human female and her eyes, describing them as the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. Word of the incident spread through the ship's communication network like a virus. Guards who had casually brutalized human families hours before began requesting backup for routine patrols. The corridors that had once echoed with confident chittering now carried whispered conversations about the thing that was hunting them. Lisa heard their fear through the ventilation systems and felt a cold satisfaction. They had separated her from Amy to break her spirit, but instead they had awakened something far more dangerous. She was no longer the prey in this situation, she had become the predator. Using the data she had stolen from the fallen guard, Lisa began to understand the layout of the entire fleet. The humans were being held on multiple ships, with the children separated from the adults across different vessels. Amy was on a research ship designated as Vessel 7, about half a mile away through the void of space. The distance seemed impossible to cross, but Lisa's engineering mind was already working on the problem. The aliens used small transport pods to move between ships, and she had observed several docking bays during her travels through the maintenance areas. She also knew that the aliens were becoming increasingly paranoid about her presence. Their search patterns were becoming more aggressive and comprehensive, which meant she was running out of time to act before they locked down the entire fleet. But the most important thing she had learned was that the aliens were afraid. For all their size and strength and advanced technology, they were capable of feeling fear when faced with something they didn't understand, and a human mother separated from her child was definitely something they didn't understand. As she made her way toward the docking bay, Lisa allowed herself a small smile. The aliens had made the mistake of thinking that love was a weakness, when in reality it was the most powerful force in the universe. They were about to learn that lesson in ways they would never forget. The hunt was just beginning, and Lisa Carter was no longer the frightened mother who had been knocked to the floor hours before. She was something new, something the galaxy had never seen, and something that even the most feared redditors in space were beginning to learn to fear. The transport pod Lisa had stolen moved silently through the void between ships, its alien controls responding to her engineering intuition despite being designed for creatures with 4 arms instead of 2. She had learned to pilot it by watching the aliens through security feeds, memorizing their movements and translating them into actions her human hands could perform. Research Vessel 7 loomed ahead of her, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of distant stars. Somewhere inside that ship, Amy was waiting for her mother to come. Lisa could feel her daughter's presence like a physical pull, drawing her forward through the darkness. She docked the pod in a maintenance bay that showed minimal security activity according to the stolen data files. The aliens' confidence in their own superiority had made them careless about securing areas they didn't think anyone could reach. They were about to learn the cost of that overconfidence. The research vessel was different from the main ship, filled with laboratories and holding cells designed for studying captured specimens. Lisa moved through its corridors like a shadow, avoiding the guard patrols while gathering information about the ship's layout and security systems. She found Amy in a holding cell on the 3rd level, curled up on a narrow bench and clutching a small stuffed animal she had somehow managed to keep during the capture. The sight of her daughter frightened but unharmed sent a wave of relief through Lisa that nearly brought her to her knees, but relief was quickly replaced by cold fury when she saw how the aliens were treating the human children. Kept in sterile cells with minimal comfort, fed bland nutrition paste, and subjected to regular examinations like laboratory animals. The casual cruelty of it all made Lisa's blood boil. Getting to Amy required passing through a security checkpoint, monitored by 2 guards and multiple scanning systems. A direct assault would be suicide, but Lisa had learned that the aliens' greatest weakness was their rigid adherence to protocol and their inability to think creatively under pressure. She began her attack by targeting the ship's environmental systems, using her engineering knowledge to create cascading failures that would force the crew to respond according to their emergency procedures. First, she overloaded the power grid in Section 4, causing backup systems to activate throughout the ship. Then she introduced a malfunction in the artificial gravity generators, creating zones where gravity fluctuated wildly between normal and 0. Aliens who had never experienced weightlessness found themselves floating helplessly while their inner ears struggled to maintain balance. The atmospheric processors were her next target. She didn't want to hurt anyone, not even her enemies, but she could make the air uncomfortable to breathe by adjusting the humidity and pressure levels. Soon, the entire crew was distracted by environmental problems that seemed to have no logical source. In the chaos that followed, Lisa made her move toward Amy's cell. The guards at the security checkpoint were focused on their emergency protocols, trying to coordinate with other sections of the ship that were reporting similar malfunctions. She used their distraction to slip past the scanning systems, which were calibrated for alien physiology and had trouble detecting her smaller human form anyway. The lock on Amy's cell was sophisticated, but Lisa's engineering background and stolen access codes made quick work of it. "Mum," Amy whispered as the cell door slid open, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "I'm here, baby," Lisa said, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. "I told you I would come for you." Amy buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and Lisa felt some of the cold fury inside her chest warm slightly. But there was no time for a proper reunion. The ship's emergency systems were already beginning to compensate for the malfunctions she had created. "We have to go," Lisa said, helping Amy to her feet. "Can you be very brave for Mummy?" Amy nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I knew you would come. I told the scary aliens that my mom was stronger than them, but they just laughed." "They're not laughing anymore," Lisa said grimly, leading Amy toward the maintenance access she had used to reach this level. Their escape was a nightmare of crawling through narrow spaces and hiding from search parties, but Amy proved to be as brave as any soldier Lisa had ever served with. The little girl followed her mother's whispered instructions without question, trusting completely in Lisa's ability to get them to safety. They made it back to the stolen transport pod just as the ship's security systems finally tracked their location. Alarms blared throughout the vessel as Lisa fired up the pod's engines and launched into space, carrying her daughter away from their captors. But as they flew back toward the main ship, Lisa realized that simply escaping wasn't enough. The aliens still held other human prisoners, including Captain Morrison and Dr. Kane. More importantly, they would continue to threaten human families unless someone taught them that such actions had consequences. "Where are we going, Mum?" Amy asked from the passenger seat, looking small and fragile in the oversized alien restraints. "We're going to make sure these creatures never hurt another family," Lisa said, her voice carrying a promise that made the ship's hull seem to vibrate with determination. Word of the escape had already reached Commander Vexter on the main vessel. and Lisa could hear the panic in the alien communications she was monitoring. The rescue had been impossible according to their calculations. Single human female should not have been able to penetrate their security, disable their systems, and extract a prisoner from the most secure section of their research ship. Lisa Carter had done exactly that, and in doing so had shattered the aliens' fundamental beliefs about human capabilities. The crew members who had casually separated families hours before were now requesting transfers to other sectors of space. Anywhere that would get them away from the terrifying human female who seemed to strike from shadows and disappear like smoke. The psychological impact was spreading through the entire fleet. Guards jumped at unexpected sounds. Routine maintenance checks became exercises in paranoia. The mighty Zephyrian war machine, which had conquered dozens of worlds through overwhelming force and psychological intimidation, was being paralyzed by one determined mother. As Lisa guided the transport pod toward the main ship's docking bay, she could see the fear in the movements of the alien crew through the windows. They knew she was coming back, and they knew that her return meant the hunt was far from over. Amy had fallen asleep in her seat, exhausted by the ordeal but safe in her mother's presence. Lisa looked at her daughter's peaceful face and felt the fire in her heart burn even brighter. The aliens had wanted to study human families to understand their weaknesses, but they had instead created something they had never encountered before: a parent with nothing left to lose and every reason to fight. The real battle was just beginning, and Lisa Carter was no longer interested in simply surviving. She was going to teach these predators that some prey was too dangerous to hunt. Lisa's return to the main ship was not the stealthy infiltration the aliens expected, but a calculated announcement of war. She piloted the stolen transport pod directly into the primary docking bay, setting it down in the middle of their most secure facility like a declaration that nowhere in their fleet was safe from her reach. Amy stayed close to her mother's side as they moved through the ship's corridors. No longer the terrified child who had been dragged away hours before, seeing her mother in action had transformed the little girl's fear into absolute confidence. If her mom said they would be safe, then nothing in the universe could harm them. "Where are we going now?" Amy whispered as they made their way through maintenance passages that Lisa now knew better than the ship's own crew. "We're going to free the others," Lisa said, "and then we're going to make sure these creatures understand what happens when they threaten human families." The rescue of the remaining prisoners was a masterpiece of psychological warfare combined with tactical precision. Lisa had learned the ship's systems well enough to turn them into weapons, and she used Amy's small size to reach areas that the larger aliens couldn't access or defend, while Lisa created distractions by overloading power systems and triggering false emergency alerts. Amy crawled through ventilation shafts to disable security cameras and unlock doors. The 8-year-old girl followed her mother's instructions with the precision of a trained operative, turning their family bond into an unbeatable tactical advantage. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't follow any logical pattern of behavior. Lisa struck at their food production systems, making their meals taste wrong without actually poisoning them. She manipulated their sleep cycles by adjusting lighting and temperature controls, leaving the crew exhausted and disoriented. Every aspect of daily life on the ship became a reminder that they were no longer in control. Guards would find their weapons mysteriously drained of power. Communication systems would develop interference that made coordination impossible. Even their waste disposal systems began malfunctioning in ways that were deeply unpleasant, but not technically dangerous. Captain Morrison and the other prisoners watched in amazement as their quiet shipmate transformed into something that defied every military manual ever written. Lisa didn't fight like a soldier following rules of engagement or a guerrilla fighter trying to weaken a superior force. She fought like a force of nature, unstoppable and implacable. "How is she doing this?" Dr. Kane whispered to Captain Morrison, as they watched Lisa coordinate their escape through seemingly impossible obstacles. "I don't think she's thinking about it," Morrison replied, observing the way Lisa moved with perfect confidence through situations that should have been hopeless. "She's operating on pure instinct now, and those instincts are designed for one thing: protecting her child." The breaking point came when Commander Vextar decided to make a personal stand against the human female who was destroying his fleets. Morale, he cornered Lisa in the ship's main corridor, backed up by his most elite warriors and carrying the most advanced weapons in their arsenal. "This ends now," Vextar declared, his voice carrying the authority of a being who had conquered worlds. "You will surrender yourself and your offspring, or we will take more drastic measures." Lisa stepped forward, placing herself between the alien commander and Amy, who stood behind her mother with complete trust. The corridor fell silent except for the humming of the ship's engines and the sound of Lisa's steady breathing. "You made a mistake," Lisa said, her voice calm and level despite the weapons pointed at her. "You thought taking my daughter away from me would make me weak and manageable." Vexter's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "You are one small female against trained warriors. What possible threat could you represent?" "You still don't understand," Lisa replied, and something in her tone made even the elite warriors take a step backward. "I'm not a threat because I'm strong or well-trained or armed with advanced technology. I'm a threat because you touched my child." What happened next would become legend among both species, though they would remember it very differently. Lisa Carter faced down the most feared commander in the Zephyrian fleet, not with weapons or technology, but with the absolute certainty that nothing in the universe would prevent her from protecting her daughter. The confrontation was brief, but decisive. Vexter, despite his size and weapons and centuries of military experience, found himself facing something beyond his comprehension. Lisa didn't fight with anger or hatred, but with the implacable force of natural law itself. When it was over, the mighty Zephyrian commander knelt on the deck plating with his weapons scattered around him, looking up at a human mother who had somehow become the most dangerous being he had ever encountered. His elite warriors stood frozen, afraid to move against something they couldn't understand or predict. "You will release all human prisoners," Lisa said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You will return us to our ship and allow us to leave, and you will never threaten another human family again." The aliens complied without question, their movements quick and nervous as they freed the remaining prisoners and prepared transport back to the They treated Lisa with the kind of fearful respect usually reserved for natural disasters or angry gods. As the human families were reunited and prepared to leave, Amy looked up at her mother with eyes full of pride and wonder. "You scared them, Mum, you scared the scary monsters." "Sometimes that's what mothers have to do," Lisa said, pulling her daughter close as they watched the Zephyrian fleet begin its retreat from human space. Captain Morrison approached them as they prepared to board their own ship. "Lisa, what you did here today, it's going to change everything. These aliens will spread word about what happened, and other species will hear the stories." Lisa looked out at the massive alien ships that were already beginning to withdraw, carrying with them a lesson they would never forget. "Good," she said simply. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before they threaten someone's children." The transformation was complete. Lisa Carter had entered this confrontation as a civilian engineer and mother, but she was leaving as something new, a symbol of human potential that even humanity itself was only beginning to understand. She had proven that the greatest weapon in the universe wasn't advanced technology or military might, but the bond between a parent and child, and in the depths of space, the most feared predators in the galaxy were learning to fear something they had never encountered before: the protective fury of a human mother. The Zephyrian fleet limped back to their homeworld carrying tales that their high command initially refused to believe. Commander Vexter sat in the medical bay of his flagship, his injuries treated but his pride permanently shattered. The other warriors who had witnessed the confrontation spoke in whispers about the human female and what she had done to their supposedly invincible commander. "It's impossible," declared Supreme Leader Krathik as he reviewed the mission reports. "One small female from a primitive species cannot defeat our most elite forces. There must be some explanation: hidden weapons, advanced technology, military enhancement." But Vexter knew better. He had looked into Lisa Carter's eyes during their final confrontation, and what he had seen there was not the result of technology or training. It was something far more dangerous: the unlimited power of a parent protecting their offspring. "She fought like no warrior I have ever encountered," Vexter reported to the assembled leadership. "Not with strategy or skill, but with absolute certainty. She knew beyond any doubt that she would succeed, because failure was not acceptable when her offspring was threatened." The other commanders chittered with nervous laughter, unable to accept that their fundamental understanding of the universe had been challenged by what they considered a lesser species. But as more reports came in from the fleet, the laughter died away. Guards who had faced human families before spoke of a change they had observed but not understood. The humans showed fear, yes, but they never broke completely. Even under the most extreme circumstances, they maintained bonds that seemed to make them stronger rather than weaker. Dr. Zethane, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, was ordered to review all data collected about human behavior during the encounter. What she found in the files changed everything she thought she knew about social species and survival instincts. "The humans call it love," she reported to the Leadership Council, her voice filled with scientific wonder. "It is not merely an emotional attachment, but a biological imperative that can override logic, fear, and even self-preservation. When their offspring are threatened, human parents undergo a transformation that increases their physical capabilities, mental focus, and determination to levels that exceed normal parameters. The implications sent shockwaves through Zephyrian society. They were a species built on the concept of individual strength and dominance, where the weak were naturally eliminated and the strong ruled through force. The idea that emotional bonds could actually increase power rather than create vulnerability was revolutionary. Word of the encounter spread through their civilization like wildfire. The beings who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries found themselves questioning everything they believed about strength and weakness. How many other species had they dismissed as inferior when they actually possessed capabilities that logic couldn't comprehend? Meanwhile, Lisa Carter returned to her normal life aboard the Starbound as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She went back to her engineering duties, helped Amy with her homework, and shared quiet meals with her daughter in their small quarters. To look at her, no one would guess that she had single-handedly defeated the most feared military force in known space. But the other crew members treated her differently now. Captain Morrison found himself asking for her opinion on matters far beyond her engineering expertise. Dr. Kane studied her with the fascination of a scientist who had witnessed evolution in action. Even Amy seemed to understand that her mother had become something special, though she couldn't quite put it into words. "Mom," Amy asked one evening as they sat together reading a bedtime story, "are you different now?" Lisa looked down at her daughter, considering the question carefully. "I don't think I'm different, sweetheart. I think I just learned what I was capable of when it really mattered. The scary aliens won't come back, will they?" "No," Lisa said with absolute certainty. "They won't come back. And if any other scary things try to hurt our family, they'll learn the same lesson." 6 months later, the first official diplomatic contact came from the Zephyrian Dominion. Their message was broadcast on all human communication frequencies, reaching every colony and outpost in human space. To the leaders of the human species, the message began: "We, the Zephyrian Dominion, wish to establish peaceful relations and formal boundaries between our territories. We seek no conflict with your people and ask only that our respective spaces remain separate." The human diplomatic corps was baffled by the message. They had no record of any previous contact with this alien species, and certainly no conflicts that would require peace negotiations. But buried in the classified files was a detailed report from the Starbound about their encounter with unknown aliens and the actions of one civilian engineer named Lisa Carter. President Martinez called an emergency session of the Colonial Council to discuss the alien message and its implications. "According to our records, we've never had any hostile contact with these Zephyrians," she said to the assembled officials. "Yet they're offering us a peace treaty as if we were equals or even superiors in some past conflict." Admiral Thompson, head of Colonial Defense, pulled up the Starbound incident report on his display. "There is one encounter on record, though it seemed too incredible to include in our official first contact protocols. A civilian named Lisa Carter apparently defeated an entire alien fleet using nothing but determination and engineering knowledge." The room fell silent as the officials read through the detailed account of what had happened. The idea that one human mother could accomplish what entire military fleets might fail to achieve seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. "What do we know about this Lisa Carter?" President Martinez asked. "She's still serving aboard the Starbound," Admiral Thompson replied. "Still working as an engineer, still raising her daughter. According to all reports, she's returned to completely normal behavior. But the aliens clearly remember what she's capable of." The peace treaty was signed 3 months later, establishing the first formal diplomatic relationship between humans and an advanced alien species. Hidden in the classified appendix was a single line that explained everything about the new relationship. Warning: do not separate human parents from their offspring under any circumstances. The Zephyrian Dominion kept their word. They established clear boundaries around human space and made sure that word spread to other species about the dangers of threatening human families. The galaxy's most feared predators had become humanity's inadvertent protectors, all because they had learned to fear something more powerful than any weapon. Lisa Carter never knew about the peace treaty or her role in protecting human space. She continued her quiet life, raising Amy and working on the engineering systems that kept their ship running safely through the darkness between stars. But sometimes, late at night when Amy was sleeping, she would look out at the stars and smile. Somewhere out there, the most dangerous beings in the galaxy remembered what happened when they threatened her daughter. and that knowledge would keep other human families safe for generations to come. Love, it turned out, was indeed the most powerful force in the universe, especially when it belonged to a human mother protecting her child.